It started as an innocent mistake. I was on a long road trip, driving through back roads to avoid traffic when my car broke down in the middle of nowhere. My phone had no signal, and I was miles away from the last gas station I had passed. The sun was already setting, and the idea of spending the night alone in my car on an empty road didn't sit well with me. That's when I saw the house. It was an old Victorian home, standing alone at the edge of a dense forest. A dim porch light flickered, barely illuminating the front steps. I could tell the place had been standing for a long time. The wood was aged and cracked, and ivy crawled up the sides like fingers gripping the walls. I hesitated. I didn't want to bother anyone, but I also didn't have many options. Maybe they had a phone I could use. Maybe they could at least point me in the right direction. I walked up to the porch and knocked. After a few moments, the door creaked open and a man peered out at me. He looked to be in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a thin frame. His clothes were neat, but something about him seemed off. He didn't smile, didn't look surprised to see me. It was almost as if he had been expecting me. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice calm and quiet. I nodded, explaining my situation. "Do you have a phone I could use?" The man shook his head. "No phone out here. Nearest one is about 10 miles that way." He gestured vaguely down the road. "But it's dark. Roads aren't safe at night. You should stay here till morning." I hesitated. The idea of staying in a stranger's house wasn't exactly comforting, but spending the night outside alone in my car seemed worse. "Are you sure it's not a bother?" I asked. The man nodded once. "Come in." I stepped inside. The house was strange. The inside was much cleaner than I expected. Too clean. There was no dust, no signs of clutter. The furniture looked antique, like something out of an old photograph. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something else I couldn't place. The man shut the door behind me. "You can stay in the guest room," he said. "Just a few rules first." I turned toward him, my stomach tightening. "Rules?" He gave a slow nod. "Don't leave your room after midnight, no matter what you hear. If you wake up and the door is open, close it immediately. If you see something in the mirror that isn't you, don't look at it." I laughed nervously. "Is this a joke?" The man's expression didn't change. "No." I forced a smile. Maybe he was just superstitious. Some people were like that, right? "All right," I said. "Got it." He stared at me for a moment longer before finally turning away. "Good. I'll show you to your room." The guest room was simple. Too simple. A small bed, a dresser, and a mirror. Nothing personal, no decorations. It felt empty, like no one had ever actually used it. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. A pressure. Like the air was heavier in this room, like something unseen was watching me. The man lingered at the doorway. "Remember the rules," he said again. Then, without another word, he shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my arms as a chill settled into my skin. The old wooden floor creaked under my weight. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the mirror. It was an antique, its surface slightly foggy with age. The frame was carved with strange patterns, twisting shapes that almost looked like faces. I turned away from it. I told myself it was just for one night. Everything would be fine. I was wrong. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. The air in the room felt heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on me. I closed my eyes, telling myself I was just being paranoid. It was an old house. Old houses made noises. Then, just as I was starting to drift off, creak. My eyes snapped open. The sound had come from outside my door, a slow, deliberate footstep. I held my breath, listening. Creak. Another step. Someone was walking in the hallway. I sat up, my pulse quickening. Maybe it was just the old man checking the house. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Then I remembered the rules. Don't leave your room after midnight, no matter what you hear. I turned my head slowly toward the clock on the nightstand. 12:17 a.m. A chill ran down my spine. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I exhaled shakily, gripping the blanket in my fists. I wasn't going to open the door. I wasn't going to break the rules. I would just close my eyes, wait for morning, and creak. This time, the sound came from inside the room. I froze. My gaze flicked to the door. It was still shut. So then, what was in here with me? I turned my head slowly, scanning the dimly lit room. The only light came from the moon outside, casting long, eerie shadows across the wooden floor. Nothing looked different. But I felt it. The air had changed. It was colder now, the chill sinking deep into my bones. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The mirror. At first, I thought it was just my own reflection. But then, I noticed something. The me in the mirror wasn't moving. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. My real body, I was breathing, shaking, gripping the blanket. But the reflection, still, motionless, watching. A shiver crawled up my spine. Then, it smiled. I scrambled back against the headboard, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. If you see something in the mirror that isn't you, don't look at it. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding. My body trembled as the silence stretched on. I wanted to look again. Every instinct screamed at me to look, but I didn't. I clenched my jaw, fists shaking, and forced myself to stay still. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a soft tap against the glass. Once, twice, a third time, and then silence. I stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. Finally, after what felt like forever, I cracked my eyes open. The mirror was normal again. My reflection moved when I moved. It was gone. But the fear in my chest didn't go away. Something had been here, and it knew I had seen it. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat awake in bed, my back against the wall, watching the door, the mirror, the shadows stretching along the floor. Hours passed. At 3:07 a.m., I heard it again. A new sound. Creak. The floorboards outside my room groaned softly, like someone was standing just outside my door, waiting. My blood ran cold. I squeezed my fists, forcing myself to stay completely still. A long, dreadful silence. And then, the doorknob turned. I nearly stopped breathing. The handle twisted slowly, like someone was testing to see if the door was locked. But I had locked it. Right? I wasn't sure anymore. My hands were clammy as I gripped the blanket. My entire body tensed, waiting. The doorknob stopped turning. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft knock. 3 gentle taps against the wood. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, a whisper. Come out. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear. The whisper had been right at my door. Soft, slow, unnatural. But I didn't answer. I stayed in bed, my hands curled into tight fists, my back pressed against the cold wall. Finally, after what felt like hours, the footsteps started again, moving away, fading down the hall. I didn't sleep that night, and I never planned to stay another. I just had to make it to morning. Then I would be gone. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the wall, watching the door, the mirror, and the shadows stretching across the wooden floor. Every creak of the old house made my heart pound, but the footsteps and whispers had stopped. I checked my phone. 3:52 a.m. A few more hours until sunrise. Then I was getting the hell out of here. But as I sat there, unmoving, a new feeling crept in. I wasn't alone. I felt it. A presence. Something watching me. My skin prickled as the air in the room grew colder, the silence turning unnatural, the kind of quiet that only happens when something is listening. I glanced at the door, still closed. The mirror, still normal. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw it. The closet door. It was open, just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. I was sure the closet had been closed when I went to bed. I hadn't opened it. I would have remembered. But now it stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness stretching into the room. I stared at it, unable to move. The gap wasn't wide enough to see inside, but I felt something there, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard. My mind raced through my options. Ignore it, close it, check inside. Then I remembered the rules. If you wake up and the door's open, close it immediately. I forced myself to move. My legs felt stiff as I swung them off the bed, my bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Slowly, carefully, I stood up. The room seemed darker now. The silence was thick. I took a step forward, then another. The closet door loomed ahead, open just wide enough to send a shiver down my spine. I reached out, fingers brushing against the rough wood, and the door swung open. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The closet was empty, or at least it looked empty. Just darkness stretching deep into the small space, deeper than it should have been. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. My hands were shaking as I reached for the knob. I just had to close it. That's all. I gripped the handle and pulled the door shut. The moment it latched, the room changed. The air shifted, thick and suffocating. The shadows on the floor moved, and then a sound. A low, quiet, ragged breath right behind me. I whipped around, my back pressed against the closet door. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I shined it around the room. Nothing, no one. But I wasn't imagining it. I had heard it. Something had been right behind me. I backed toward the bed, my pulse pounding in my ears. My fingers dug into the blanket as I sat down, struggling to stay calm. Then I noticed something else. The mirror. The closet had been behind me. But in the mirror, the breath I had heard had come from the reflection. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I grabbed my bag and crossed the room in a hurry. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I just needed to leave. My fingers fumbled with the doorknob. I twisted it hard, locked. I jerked it again. Nothing. My breath came in the shallow gasps. I checked the lock. There wasn't one. The door wasn't just locked. It was being held shut. My stomach twisted. I stepped back, pressing my palm against the wood. It was cold. Too cold. Then, from the other side of the door, a soft knock. I nearly collapsed. I pressed myself against the wall, my whole body trembling. "Please," I whispered, voice barely audible. "Let me out." No response. Then, the handle turned. Slow, deliberate. My breath hitched. Something was on the other side. And then, the door swung open. The old man stood in the hallway. His face was calm, but his eyes were wrong. Too dark, too hollow. "You're awake," he said. I couldn't speak. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. Then, after a long pause, he stepped aside. "You should leave," he said. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and ran. The house felt different now. The walls seemed taller, the hallways longer. Shadows flickered along the edges of my vision, moving just out of sight. I reached the front door, grabbed the handle, and for a split second, I hesitated. Something was telling me not to open it, not to step outside. Then I heard it, a whisper, not from the old man, not from the shadows, from inside my own head. If you leave now, you'll never know what's waiting for you. I shoved the thought away and threw the door open. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I ran to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered, the headlights flickering on. I didn't dare look back at the house, but as I pulled away, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A silhouette standing in the upstairs window. Not the old man, something else, watching me, waiting. I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached a gas station miles away. I told myself I was safe now, that it was over. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had left that house, but something from that house hadn't left me. I sat in my car at the gas station, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the near-empty parking lot. I could still feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was out. I was safe. So why didn't it feel like it? I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles clung beneath my eyes, my face pale and tense. I looked like someone who had just barely escaped something, because I had. But I wasn't sure I had escaped everything. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone. Still no signal. That's when I noticed something on my passenger seat. My bag. Except the zipper was open. I knew I hadn't touched it. My hands started to tremble as I slowly reached over and pulled it toward me. Inside, resting neatly on top of my clothes, was a small, old book. I hadn't packed it. I had never seen it before, but I recognized it instantly. The same carved patterns as the mirror's frame. The same cold feeling from the house. I swallowed hard, hesitating before flipping open the cover. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded. The words were written in neat, deliberate strokes, and at the top of the first page was a name. My name. My breath hitched. I flipped through the pages, my fingers shaking. The book was about me. It described my entire night in the house, every step I had taken, every moment of fear, every sound, even my thoughts. But that wasn't possible. I turned to the final page. My stomach dropped. The words were still being written. Right there, in real time, fresh ink formed before my eyes. He turns the page. He realizes it's too late. I slammed the book shut. My pulse was out of control, my breathing ragged. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I grabbed the book, threw open the car door, and hurled it into the darkness of the empty lot. It hit the pavement with a dull thud. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I climbed back into the car, jammed the key into the ignition, and tore out of the gas station parking lot. I needed to put distance between me and whatever that house had left with me. But I was wrong. I could never really leave. I drove for miles, not stopping, not slowing down. The roads were empty, the sky a dull shade of gray. My thoughts raced with 1,000 questions. What was that book? How had it followed me? Who or what was writing it? Then my headlights flickered. The engine stuttered. A sharp, cold dread gripped my chest. Number no, not now. I gritted my teeth, pressing the gas pedal harder. But the car's dashboard glitched, the radio crackling with sudden static. Then, through the speakers, a voice. My voice. You can't leave. My blood turned to ice. The headlights went out completely. The engine died. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of an empty, dark road. I sat there, gripping the wheel, the air inside the car growing colder. Then, in the rearview mirror, a shadow, a figure, sitting in my back seat, watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, in a voice that was almost mine, it whispered, "You read the book. Now you're part of the story." I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, the sun was rising and I was parked on the side of the road, alone. The car started like nothing had happened. No glitches, no whispers, no shadow in the back seat. For a brief moment, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, that my mind had broken under the fear and exhaustion. But when I looked over at the passenger seat, my heart nearly stopped. The book was back, resting neatly on the seat, waiting, and this time the title had changed. Jason Carter, Final Chapter. I couldn't breathe. The book sat there, perfectly still on the passenger seat, as if it had been waiting for me to wake up. Jason Carter, Final Chapter. I didn't touch it. I didn't even want to look at it. My body felt numb, my mind screaming at me that this wasn't possible. I had thrown it away, I had left it behind, and yet here it was, a sign that I hadn't left anything behind at all, because whatever was in that house had left with me. I put my hands on the wheel, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breathing was uneven, my heart slamming against my ribs. I had to get rid of it. I grabbed the book carefully, my hands trembling. The cover was ice cold, colder than anything I had ever touched. I could feel something pulsing inside it, like a heartbeat. I shoved open the car door and stepped out onto the side of the road. The sun had fully risen now, casting a warm golden glow over the empty stretch of highway. The normalcy of it all felt wrong, like the world was pretending nothing had happened, like it was mocking me. I looked down at the book. It sat in my hands, small and unassuming, like it didn't contain the horror of the night before. But I knew better. I took a deep breath. Then, with all my strength, I threw it. I watched it sail through the air, disappearing into the tall grass by the roadside. Gone. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. No whispers, no shadows, no watching eyes, just silence. I exhaled, my breath shaky. Then I climbed back into the car, put the keys in the ignition, and drove away. I didn't look back. I made it home by evening. I had never been so grateful to see my apartment, the familiarity of my own things, my bed, my walls, my door that locked from the inside. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, I let out a small, relieved laugh. I had made it. It was over. I took a long, scalding hot shower, washing away the sweat and fear from the night before. By the time I crawled into bed, exhaustion had finally caught up with me. I let out a deep sigh, my body sinking into the mattress. My muscles ached, my eyelids heavy. Everything felt normal again, or so I thought. I woke up in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know why. The room was quiet, dark, still. Then I felt it, a presence. The air was cold, the same kind of cold from the house. I lay completely still, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to move, didn't want to see. But something in my gut told me to look. Slowly, I turned my head toward the nightstand, and my stomach dropped. The book was there, sitting neatly on the wooden surface as if it had always been there, waiting for me. I couldn't breathe. I had thrown it away, and yet it had come back. The title had changed again. The letters were sharper, etched into the cover like deep scratches. Jason Carter, the end. I stared at it, my body frozen with dread. Then, from the corner of the room, in the darkness beyond my bed, I heard it. A slow, deliberate whisper. It's time to finish your story. I don't remember what happened next. The next morning, I woke up in bed, the book gone. My room was normal. My apartment was normal. Everything was fine. Except it wasn't. Because I know it's still out there. Waiting, watching, and someday, when I least expect it, I'll hear that voice again, whispering from the shadows, telling me that my story isn't over yet.